All right, everyone. It's me, Brahm. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today, we have two guests with us. We have John Boghossian, who is the CEO of Kanna Health, and we're joined by Ryan Protzko, Dr. Ryan Protzko, actually, who is the president of Kanna Health. Kanna Health is working on developing what will be the world's first FDA-approved therapy for premature ejaculation. And the secret ingredient in that therapy is inspired by Kanna, which is a naturally occurring compound, a plant medicine that's been used in certain indigenous cultures for a very long time. This is a very new thing for us to be exploring on the podcast. I don't think we've ever talked about premature ejaculation before. I don't think we've ever talked about Kanna. So John and Ryan, thank you guys so much for joining me to kind of break down this new territory for the podcast. I really appreciate your guys' time.
Thanks a lot, Bram.
Thanks for having us.
It's my pleasure. So, guys, like I said, there's a lot to unpack here. What's the origin story of Kanna Health? How did you decide that premature ejaculation was an issue that was worth solving? How did you decide that Kanna was maybe the right therapeutic direction to go into? Let's just get started with that origin story. And Ryan, if you want to start, maybe that would make sense.
Yeah, sure. Kanna is actually a succulent that grows in Africa, kind of on the western cape of South Africa up through Namibia. And it's been used as a traditional medicine for a really long time by the San and Khoikhoi people. And it's been studied for mostly these mood elevating qualities. And it's a bush medicine, so it's applied to a lot of different applications, but definitely a long history of human use. The plant has over 25 different alkaloids that are distinct, which makes it really unique as a medicinal plant. And I think it's actually really fascinating how it's been used and some of the chemistry around those compounds. I was so interested in it several years ago, I decided to start experimenting with it myself. Actually ended up making different preparations of alkaloids and started isolating them. And even started ingesting some to see what some of the effects could be. One of the interesting outcomes of those experiments was realizing that some preparations delayed the amount of time to climax in the bedroom, which at first was kind of strange and surprising, often frustrating at times. But I think the thing that kind of clicked to me was that I realized there wasn't actually an FDA-approved drug for premature ejaculation out there, and that something that had this type of effect on people could actually be really helpful to patients. So that was kind of the inception of this idea. And then kind of connected with John, who has a history in developing natural medicines and also new drugs. So that's kind of how Kanna Health was actually started. So I don't know if you want to fill in any blanks there, John.
I think the origin story is a pretty pristine one in my book of drug discoveries. Really, if you look back at Viagra, which was developed as a treatment for erectile dysfunction, it was also discovered as a side effect of a cardiovascular trial. So these things sometimes happen by accident, and I think this was a very happy one.
Yeah, and it does lend itself and is somewhat in line with your background, John, right? You were VP of operations at Compass Pathways, which is another company that the listeners will be very familiar with, that is turning a natural medicine and aiming to turn natural medicine into something that is an FDA-approved therapeutic. But let me go back real quick. I want to ask, you mentioned, Ryan, there's no FDA-approved therapeutic for premature ejaculation. Maybe a good place to start with is why is that? It seems like something that could be a big moneymaker. I don't know if you have any stats around the number of men that suffer from premature ejaculation, but how come there's nothing out there for this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons, and John, I think it'd be great if you could take this out afterwards. But one thing is, I think just culturally, sexual medicine as a field doesn't get a lot of attention, especially academically. And so, it's really hard to get a lot of innovation in the space. And so when we came across this really fairly spontaneous and kind of exciting discovery, we kind of compressed a lot of drug discovery into a short period of time. which allowed us to move forward really, really quickly. So there have been attempts on this indication in the past, but I think it really took doing some, some serendipity, some hard biology in the beginning to actually get this all together. John, I don't know if you want to fill in some blanks from the commercial
Yeah,
side, but
sure.
that's something we definitely looked into.
Yeah, if you think of it also from a regulatory standpoint, the FDA and other regulatory agencies have only been thinking systematically about sexual disorders for the last couple of decades, really. So Pfizer in the late 90s and early 2000s was really successful at engaging with the regulators, especially the FDA, to firm up a couple of definitional points around, what is really specific about a man that suffers with erectile dysfunction, and also rebrand the problem of impotence into one of erectile dysfunction that kind of takes the fault out of the individual and puts it squarely into the category of a kind of disorder. So it's only around that same time and that also happened for premature ejaculation. So just for background for our listeners, premature ejaculation is defined by finishing before you want to in bed as a man. And that means different things to different jurisdictions, but in general, finishing within 2 minutes of the beginning of intercourse it defines you as suffering from premature ejaculation. And as you rightly said, Brom, it does impact up to about 1 in 5 men and their partners worldwide. And so in the early 2000s, there were a couple of attempts to get a product across the finish line. Those were failures, in particular one called Depoxetine that was being developed by Johnson & Johnson failed to obtain FDA approval, and that was mostly due to its safety profile. As you can imagine, given the number of men that suffer from this and would eventually use a product like this, the threshold or the standard of safety that the regulators have set is pretty high. And so there hasn't been yet a program that has been able to successfully cross that. And I hope that we can convince you throughout the discussion that we have a good shot at that.
Yeah. So 20% of men, that's a pretty massive market if you're able to. And of course, as you mentioned, it's not just the men that suffer, right? It's like the partners of the men also suffer, presumably. So seems like a worthwhile endeavor to go after. Maybe something that might be interesting to touch on here is like, we can get into the details of how does this actually work? Like, what's the mechanism of action? I know you mentioned that Kanna is usually used in the indigenous context as like a mood enhancer, but what is actually happening chemically? Is this just like another form of psychedelics? Is it something different? Is it closer to some other class that people might be familiar with? And I can kind of set you up here. I mean, if someone just goes and Googles Kanna, one of the things that you'll see is that it is often described as like a natural MDMA. Do you think that characterization is accurate?
Yeah, no, we've definitely had that comment in the past, and it was surprising at first. I mean, there was nothing really like pointing in that direction from what we had learned and seen. It was, and I think it's mostly generated by kind of popular culture type of news articles at this point. And I think it probably has to do with either the types of supplements that are out there and how they're marketed. So they're kind of seen as these they're honestly these mixtures of compounds, and it's not really clear what's responsible for what effects. And they're also kind of going after a certain market of either some sort of enhancement or natural high type of clientele. So from our perspective, we're trying to build something completely different. We've even seen that the MOA type of preclinical data that we're getting works entirely differently than how MDMA does for the one particular molecule we're trying to develop. So we don't really draw the same conclusions from that.
All right. Well, let that be a message to anyone who might think that they can replicate MDMA by ordering some Kanna off of Amazon. It's probably not going to work in the way that you're expecting it to.
I just wanted to also talk very briefly about the problem of premature ejaculation in terms of the actual disease burden outside of the bedroom. So I think the part where we say that these men are not able to have a like functioning sex life is like definitely behind the core part of the market, but it's also a bit along the lines of what you alluded to, Bram, to do with the impact that this condition has outside of the bedroom. So when you survey men, there is a couple of things that become quite clear, and those include the fact that having this condition basically impacts people's self-confidence. They tend to go into like depressive type of behaviors, and it also, in the most extreme cases, it impacts their relationship, and sometimes even ends kind of relationships. So what we're really looking to do is going beyond just solving the actual kind of bedroom problem, but also contributing to, of course, more longer lasting and more fulfilling intimacy, but also contributing to overall kind of mental well-being and relationship health.
Yeah, there's a ton of discourse around like mental health and physical health are not separate things. They feed into each other, and you might as well add sexual health to that access. Like sexual health impacts mental health, which impacts physical health, which impacts sexual health, et cetera. They're not isolated systems.
Exactly. But over to the first question you were asking about how this stuff actually works.
Yeah, exactly. So, no, as I mentioned, Kanna's contains, this wide array of different alkaloids, right? So it's a pretty big distribution of activities that you can see within those compounds. What's distinct that we're doing is we've actually found one particular molecule that is we can trace back to having this delay on climax in males. And we've been able to study this molecule in models for premature ejaculation, particularly in rats. And so we've been able to show that the molecule has a dose-dependent effect on delaying ejaculation, both through the signaling pathway, through the neural circuitry, as well as affecting things like kind of core to ejaculation, like the seminal vesicle pressure, for example, doesn't increase in the same way that it would in a normal ejaculating male. So there's a couple different mechanisms that we think that this thing is working, which are actually pretty well described in the literature. So that was pretty exciting to see.
Do you want to touch on what those are, or is that confidential?
I mean, without going into too many boring details, one is really in monoaminergic signaling. With an increase in serotonin between the synapses, that actually increases the serotonin signaling and short circuits the pathway for ejaculation. And then the other is this like esterase enzyme that we seem to be slowing down its activity. So that actually increases the amount of signaling through that pathway. And then your seminal vesicle pressure that you see in these rats basically doesn't increase in the way that they should to ejaculate. So,
so the first thing you mentioned with increase in serotonin, one of the things that you'll see if you're just like a guy in your 30s scrolling on Instagram is like all these ads for companies like Hims that are marketing SSRIs to be used off label, meaning the FDA has not approved them for this use, but they're being marketed for it anyway as a treatment for premature ejaculation. What are sort of, obviously there's a commonality in that you're mentioning serotonin, these are SSRIs, which impact serotonin. What's like the difference between what Kanna is doing and what an SSRI might be doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the reason that these off-label SSRIs are being used for premature ejaculation is for a similar reason for the drug that we're developing, in that it is increasing this amount of serotonin and kind of short-circuiting the signaling pathway for ejaculation. Very differently, though, a lot of the SSRI drugs, all the ones that are being described for off-label use, have been designed for really long half-lives. So once a day dosing kind of hit like a baseline of drug in the system, and it's supposed to elicit this type of mood effect over a long period of time. And that obviously for an indication like premature ejaculation, that's not what you're trying to fix. And so that's actually a side effect that you'll end up getting, is all these SSRIs causing side effects for sexual disorder. KH001, the drug we're developing, has this really short half-life. So it has really rapid absorption, gets to the target very quickly, and it gets cleared out by metabolism very quickly as well. So we think that that is a really big advantage because you're not getting kind of this long-term baseline amount that would confer side effects, basically. So it's kind of dealing with the problem directly and very quickly, but kind of avoiding those side effects as a result. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you hear all the time, part of the reason why, I mean, getting back to like the meta theme of psychedelics on the podcast, part of the reason why people are so excited about psychedelics is that they're sick of SSRIs and all the side effects they have, which often includes sexual dysfunction in men. Like either you can't get an erection, or even if you can get an erection, you have a hard time achieving orgasm. But it's like if you could take a lower dose of an SSRI that just maybe weakened the sexual stimulus just enough that it didn't like kill the arousal, but just extended the orgasm. And then if you had that in a format that could be taken acutely rather than chronically, meaning you just take it before you want to have sex, rather than having to take it every day and allow it to build up in your system, that seems like a game changer to me. So is that kind of the right way to think about it? It's almost like a much lower dose and rapid acting SSRI in a sense.
The rapid acting nature, I think, is kind of the crux of it, and really unique about this molecule.
Very interesting. Huh. So, okay. And outside of the off-label SSRIs, are there any other things that people are taking today to treat premature ejaculation that, Kanna Health might be competing with? Like, I know there's numbing creams and things like that you see, and, condoms that have like a desensitization lube and everything. How do you see Kanna or a product like this fitting into the whole like marketplace of potential solutions for PE?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and you have laid out, Bram, some of the main usual suspects that we see. So in terms of treatment options that patients have at their kind of disposals, they kind of change from country to country, but by and large, the market is made up of a pretty fragmented set of options that are all inferior for different reasons, with unwanted side effects. So I think we've had the discussion around antidepressants or SSRIs just now. That's what makes up the bulk of scripts in the US. In Europe, there is a compound called Depoxetine, which has been developed again by Johnson and Johnson. Did not get FDA approval, but did get approval in some jurisdictions, including in Europe. It's been a commercial failure for the simple reason that there are side effects that are seen at therapeutic doses, and it simply doesn't cross the threshold of safety that one would need in this indication. And what we see is a lot of patients start on the compound, but then rapidly stop using it because of these side effects. And so,
do you know what kind of side effects?
Yeah, it's a good question. So they in the trials, they included even things like syncope or fainting, which is obviously pretty. Let's say it's a pretty tall order for a drug to treat
you
something
don't want to
like
be fainting during sex.
Exactly. Of course, in clinical practice, there's like a bunch of others. So that's for Dupoxetine. And then you're right. There are all sorts of, wipes and numbing creams, like topical creams that you can use. These are not scalable for a bunch of reasons, right? I mean, they destroy the spontaneity of the moment. You need to go in like separate space, and then they also impact the experience quite a bit, frankly, because you desensitize the penis for the male. You also can desensitize the partner. which makes for like a pretty incongruous like sexual intercourse type of encounter. So, but those are the ones that we see, being sold en masse by the likes of Roman Hims and their European counterparts like Manual and Newman in the UK. So that's really the landscape, and what we need to win, because I think this is pretty important question, and we can talk about each of these three parts. But I think what we are developing and needs to be developed to win in this indication is something that is ultra safe, that is effective, of course, at extending time to ejaculation, and is also on demand. So it has the qualities that we just talked about to be able to be taken in a highly acute setting, as you've said, Brom. And we hope that our compound K001 has those three attributes, and we're happy to talk about those if that's of interest.
Well, let's talk about the efficacy first. So, Ryan, you discovered this kind of anecdotally, and actually, if you search just in Reddit like Kanna premature ejaculation, you'll find a few other anecdotal reports out there. But when you're actually moving something through the FDA, you have to start by generating animal data. So, what sort of animal data have you guys generated, and what do the results look like once you actually, get in the lab and are measuring things rigorously?
Yeah, for sure. No, yeah, the FDA, they do like to see data. And so we've put a lot of effort into gathering animal data, both on the efficacy and safety side. On the efficacy side, in the study, like I mentioned, we've put the molecule into these models for premature ejaculation, particularly in rodents, where you can actually study the amount of time it takes for a rodent to ejaculate, and then kind of administer a drug and see what that effect is. We've seen that we do get this dose-dependent effect where as we increase the amount of our drug, it delays the time to ejaculation. It also, at certain doses, will completely block ejaculation. So we think that there's going to be some dose finding that's pretty critical here. And then we've done a full clinical toxicology program to support our phase 1. So we've done a lot of work to show that the drug is safe, and we can not only make a lot of the drug, but we can also put it into animals and monitor side effects at really, really high doses. So that gives us a sense of how safe the drug is, and that these side effects won't come into play, hopefully, at the therapeutic doses that we're looking at when we go into phase 2. So.
And just to get a little bit more specific, at a dose like a milligrams per kilogram that might be reasonable for a human, what sort of extension are we talking about? Is it doubling the time? Is it 10xing the time? Is it 10% increasing the time? I'm sure it's varied, but
yeah, I mean, we're going to have to see like when we actually get into the trials, but our current TPP, we're shooting for at least 3 to 5x what the time to ejaculation is, and then that it kind of would be in line with an efficacious effect. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, John.
Yeah, sure. And just for our listeners, in case they're not familiar with TPP, that's the target product profile, or the USP of the product that you're really shooting for. And I want to commend you, Ryan, for staying very calm as you were telling us about this pretty niche area of like sexual health research in sure. Animals, which is not very common. So thanks for that. I think it shows that Ryan and I are on a roadshow to raise money from time to time, and we talk about this often. I mean, in terms of what the FDA will consider to be meaningful, what we've seen in these SSRIs or like the Boxetine is that they can improve the baseline time to ejaculation by 2 to 3x. And so I think that's the minimum that we want to be able to showcase. And then in the rat study that Ryan just mentioned, there were doses, to answer your question, Brom, where the average time for the average rodent in that group was increased by 2x, but there were also doses at a relatively higher dose where we just saw no ejaculation at all, which would mean a much higher like number of X times improvement on the time to ejaculation. So it will be a case of finding the sweet spot really for a dose that will give some elongation, but that still enables the users to get to climax, because we obviously don't want to hamper that.
Yeah, definitely. So let me, just to get into a little bit more specifics, I'm sure people will be curious. How does one exactly go about measuring the amount of time that a rodent takes to ejaculate? Like, what's the process like? Do you have some poor grad student there with like a stopwatch, or is there what's the methodology?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure they're a very excited grad student to be doing that type of work. No, they're, yeah, in one model, for example, there's a drug that you can give to the animal that will actually induce ejaculation. So I don't know who's going to market that drug, but that basically you can give it to the rodent, and then it's pretty consistent the amount of time to ejaculation. And then you can co-administer a drug to see how that affects the ejaculation time. The other thing you can do is you can do these studies in sexually experienced rats. So you can, sit there with a stopwatch and you monitor the time of mounting. And you'll get this kind of distribution of rats that fit within the fast ejaculating group, kind of average, and then long time to ejaculation. Then you can take all of those rats and within the fast ejaculating group, and then give those drugs and measure their time to ejaculation as an effect. And those are the two kind of leading models right now for measuring ejaculation in rodents. But in humans, it's a little bit different, the clinical setting, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll definitely talk about the clinical stuff in a minute. I just wanted to touch on real quick before we get to the humans. Obviously, there's animal safety data that's generated as well. So, obviously, Kanna has been used by humans for quite a long time, just in the indigenous world. So, it's probably safe for humans. But when you've actually run these animal studies, has anything come up that's interesting? Anything worth noting on the safety side?
I think the most interesting thing is that we've had to dose at such high amounts. So I think that was kind of the really interesting outcome there. It was a bit of a challenge from a chemistry standpoint, because we had to make so much drug to give to animals. But to actually get to these, extremely high doses was a good sign that we have a fairly safe drug.
So you had to get to very high doses on a mgs per kgs level in order to induce the side effects, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
And to put it in context, because back to the, like, what do we need to win, right? We need safety, efficacy, and on demand. So we talk about efficacy on the safety front. I mean, there is a 4,000-fold difference between the dose that we're starting with in humans and the equivalent dose that we were able to dose the animals with without seeing any side effects. So it was only north of that we started to see adverse events that meant that we had to stop dosing. So that 4,000x safety margin, we call it, is pretty significant, and bears good omen about the likelihood of us being able to find that sweet spot of dose, and get it approved without having any issues when it comes to side effects.
That makes sense. So you mentioned, Ryan, that one of the challenges was on the chemistry side because you had to make so much of this stuff. Maybe that would be a good segue to just talk about the fact that while this is a naturally occurring compound, you guys are not growing and harvesting the natural plant. You're synthesizing this. Can we maybe talk about the choice, the reasoning for that, and what any implications of that might be?
Yeah, for sure. That was a very strategic decision from the beginning, to kind of transition away from working with plants for sourcing any sort of molecules, either as starting materials or any sort of APIs. So part of this was overall environmental risk. If you imagine having to harvest a bunch of crops and get them into some sort of commercial supply down the line, you have storms, you have a virus, something like that wiped out your crop, then you're kind of in trouble. The other is like batch consistency. There's some big advantages to moving to a synthetic method, so you can actually have some more consistency between your batches. And then you also, when you move to synthetic approaches, you have an entire world full of these contract research manufacturing groups that can put out bids for competitive production of your drug. And so, from a supply chain perspective, it made a lot of sense to move towards a synthetic route. It definitely required some innovation. So we had to go from these kind of milligram routes that we had kind of sketched out on paper to kilograms in a very short period of time. So we managed to do that within a year, which led to some really exciting IP. And we now at the end of all of that have a very nice route to making kilograms worth of our drug at a pretty short order time. So I think overall it was a good thing to get on very quickly on our end. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's somewhat similar to what Compass Pathways is doing with synthesizing psilocybin versus extracting it from mushrooms. But there's one thing that's kind of different here, and I'm curious to hear your guys' response. So, in the case of psychedelics for Compass Pathways, for example, the reason why someone would opt for the pharmaceutical version is because that's the version that's legal, right? Like you can't just get mushrooms unless you're willing to break the law. With Kanna, on the other hand, though, Kanna is not a controlled substance. Like you can go on Amazon, you can order a bunch of Kanna supplements. There's a ton of products out there that exist already. In a world where KH001 does get approved by the FDA, why would someone opt for the Kanna Health synthetic version of Kanna versus going on Amazon and just buying whatever supplement they see there that's the cheapest?
It's a really good question, and one that we often talk about. I'll get us started, and Ryan, please chime in. I am very happy, by the way, to cap off on that discussion we just had. That just like Compass, we can say that no succulents or no Kanna plants are hurt in the process of making our compound, which I think is also good from a sustainability perspective. Also, because the Kanna plant is actually pretty rare. And you would have to have like dedicated farms to kind of do this at a really large scale if you wanted to be able to go all the way to the market with that. So on your questions of the supplements, I think there's a number of aspects that are worth mentioning here. So first off, the Kanna plant includes many different alkaloids, and most of the supplements that you'll find only contain the relevant alkaloid in a relatively small portion. So you would have to take a lot of the supplement in order to see the effects, which might then yield to kind of side effects in other ways. So that's one. Another is that there are a number of ways in which having a synthetic drug product which is pure and kind of consistent and associated with the data that you have, ends up building quite a lot of, call it like brand loyalty or loyalty in general from kind of clinicians and patients alike. And that is what we're doing, right? We are doing all the studies that the FDA requires. Those are being done with a novel and proprietary synthetic form of a compound, which is optimized for drug development. That's going to have a lot of different advantages that people will probably want to pay, for access to. And then the other one is that, like simply spoken. Well, actually, I think those were the two only points. You can cut out that third one when you do the recording. Ryan, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I would maybe just add that by going through this FDA process, we're going to show that this drug product that we're pushing forward is safe. It's well characterized. We'll have really high standards for quality. and it'll be known to be efficacious at that point upon approval. With supplements, anything containing that ingredient, they'd be considered selling a drug at that point, which could put them at risk. And they also can't really be advertising for treating any sort of, medical indication or trying to treat some sort of disease as an effect. So I think there's a lot of disadvantages from a commercial standpoint to go that route. And it really is a completely separate market at that point.
The other thing I wanted to mention is that, Kanna Health would be joining a very, very large body of successful drug developers that have gone the same routes. So if you look at, like fish oil, there's a bunch of like supplements out there. There's also, GSK has an OTC kind of product that still, grows like multiple hundreds of millions, if not like $1 billion a year sales. You have GW Pharma that kind of developed Epidiolex, which is basically CBD that could also be purchased, in other ways. But still, people, when they treat their health, they usually want to go for the approved thing, the thing that can make health claims, to Ryan's point. And so, we think that that's the way to maximize access. That doesn't mean that there won't be some ultra or some power users that will still go their own route. But we think that's not going to be the case for the mass market.
Yeah. And I mean, the points that you made they stand pretty strongly on their own. I mean, with supplements, you really never know what you're getting. They could be tainted, they could be underdosed, they could be overdosed. You really never know, which is why I don't really take very many supplements, because it's impossible to know what you're getting. And then the other point that you mentioned, I don't want to let that one get lost either, is that there's really a specific alkaloid that you think is responsible for this effect. And if you just buy a plant extract, you're getting not just that alkaloid, but like 23 others. And I actually, a few months ago, was doing my own self-experimentation, and I ordered what was sold as like a full spectrum extract. And I was doing the calculations to see how much of this extract I would need to take in order to get the effective dose of the alkaloid. And it was a very large quantity of powder. Like it would have to be put into, multiple pills if I was going to take that. So if you can just get that one alkaloid and know that it's been synthesized to be pure, that's going to be a much more convenient form factor. It can probably be in one small pill or sublingual strip or something like that. And that will be, much more convenient and effective. So yeah, I think that there are good reasons to wait for the FDA approved pure alkaloid.
Thanks for sharing your N=1 clinical trial.
It's my N=1 clinical trial. Yes, my own little chemistry lab back there. Yeah, Kanna is quite interesting. So, and of course, what you also mentioned about it being more sustainable makes sense too. Like we don't want to turn the Kanna plant itself, or the succulent, and drive it to extinction. So we've talked a lot about the production process and the animal studies. You guys recently announced some big news that you've been given the green light to start human trials. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. It's been a pretty momentous, I would say, month for the company. So what happened, and then I'll rehash why this is very relevant, is that we obtained, we did two things late last month. One is that we successfully opened what's called an IND with the FDA. IND is short for investigational new drug product. And so that's basically news that signifies that the FDA acknowledges the potential treatment that we are developing for this condition specifically. And so, there's a number of companies that will typically open that prior to phase 2. We were in a position where we had a very narrow window of time where we had generated all the data that we needed in order to do it prior to phase 1. And so we went for it. And the FDA said yes. So we are very excited about that, because I think that really puts us on the map. And then the other news that came along in the same week, actually, is that we've obtained clinical trial approval from the UK regulator, which is called the MHRA. It's the equivalent of the FDA here in the UK. where the company is based, to proceed to human studies. So that's basically to say that that we are able to now investigate our compounds in human subjects to start the phase 1 study. So as a reminder to our listeners, drug development is basically all the animal stuff that we've just spent the better part of the last 20 minutes to talk about, and then phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And so we are now in phase 1, and we are recruiting the first participants into the study this month, which is really exciting. And what's even more exciting from my perspective is that we achieved this in a record amount of time and money spent. So we have done this in 2.5 years since incorporating the company. I don't want to quote averages because there are many studies out there, but going from inception of the project to human work within 2.5 years is very, very short when you think about the more like typical timelines for drug development, which would, I think, get to something like between 4 and 6 years to get to this point, kind of depending on the project. And we only spent $7 million to get here, which also shows that we have been able to do it in a pretty frugal and efficient way. In pharma companies with nicely sized budgets, teams are able to operate with like a different kind of cost benefit analysis on individual experiments. So I'm really happy and proud of our team. You're speaking to myself and Ryan, but we are backed by a great group of people as well as board members and advisors that have enabled us to get to this point.
That's incredible. So yeah, 2.5 years, pretty quick to go from 0 to 60, basically. So that means that the first safety studies in humans are going to begin in the next few months, I assume. And
it's actually and sorry for interrupting, Brom. It's actually this month. So
this month, okay.
Yeah, so that study is being run in a single site here in the UK, and the first subject is hopefully going to be dosed later this month.
Amazing. Okay. And that only tests for the safety, not the efficacy. Once the product is shown to be safe in humans, that's when you begin the phase 2 trial, which actually tests the efficacy. And that obviously has a lot more participants and takes longer. But what does the efficacy studies actually look like? I mean, is it people basically just time themselves and self-report that it works? How exactly does that work? It's kind of an interesting thing to study in a clinical setting.
Yeah, it is. So the clinical studies indeed will be in patients that suffer with the condition. And traditionally, what has been done to measure the effect is either the patient or the patient's partner timing the time to climax with a stopwatch. So they will typically, hit start at the start of intercourse, which is technically defined as the entering of the penis into the vaginal chamber, and then they will hit press again at the end of intercourse, which is defined as climax. And that time will be reported as part of the studies. And yeah, I can see your smirk, Brom, over here. I mean, this is a pretty imperfect, but basically the way that things go. We have actually looked in a funny turn of events at technological solutions to this, such that you wouldn't have to ask people to time themselves. There are a number of different trade-offs associated with that. What then counts,
like an
what
AI
is the signal?
computer vision algorithm or something to measure.
Yeah, or like a ring of some sort, or an audio triggered kind of assistant. But then there's all sorts of things that can creep in as well. So what's looking most likely, and what most of the programs in this space have done, is to kind of stick to that traditional and validated and accepted by the FDA method to measure, and then do some exploratory things on the side, which we are considering.
Right. Keep it simple. Gotcha. Okay. And what is your estimated timeline for, like, how long is the phase 1 going to take, and then when do you think phase 2 kicks in?
Yeah, so phase one is a relatively cookie cutter type of study. It will take about 10 months. It's kind of split in three elements, two of which are required, one of which is optional that we're adding. Usually there's like a single ascending dose kind of study and then a multiple ascending dose study. And this is basically to understand, the objective of these studies is to understand what is the maximum tolerated dose. So the dose at which, any side effects might start to be observed in humans. So those we will do. We will also do what's called a food effect arm. That food effect arm is a part of the study that looks to assess the effect of the compound and the exposure of it in the human body with and without food intake. Because obviously people will end up making decisions about intercourse, pre-meal, post-meal, etc. So that's the 10 months phase one study that we're engaged with right now. It will hopefully report out sometime next year. And then we move on to phase two studies, as you were mentioning, that will be based out of the US, which is our top and key priority market, and we'll have multiple clinics or hospitals involved in it. That will have a couple of hundred patients, and will take a year and a half to 2 years to complete.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, exciting times ahead, it sounds like. So maybe this would be a good time to talk about two different things here. I know that premature ejaculation is the lead indication, but it's not necessarily the end goal for the company. You have ambitions to look at the other potential therapeutic applications of the Kanna plant. Do you want to talk a little bit about what those are?
Yeah, sure. No, we're doing both. So, a lot of studying of how the plant's been used in the past. So, our co-founder, Dr. Nigel Garrica, has spent. He's a classically trained. He's a doctor. He's an ethnobotanist. He spent time like in the bush with groups, learning how they administer lots of different botanical plants, but with a big focus on Kanna. We've learned a lot from him and all of his anecdotal evidence, like what these plants and the alkaloids can be used for. And so we're kind of using that mixed in with some really hardcore medicinal chemistry to figure out like what the best next indication class will be for the assets we want to develop. And so I think it's a really nice mix of different strategies that we can employ. We're taking a lot of focus on CNS right now. I think the rapid absorption qualities of the drugs that we're developing are really unique. And we've also gotten some really interesting structure-activity relationship data on how we can kind of tweak the molecule to go after different types of targets and kind of apply that to new indications where there's a definite need by patients. So it's earlier on work for us, but I think that's definitely going to be an exciting next stage for the company. As we kind of move through the clinic. Yeah.
The only thing I wanted to add is to kind of connect the dots with how like drug development has happened in the past and how it's happened like certainly in a number of companies that we've been involved with in the past. So nature gives us something which has co-evolved with the human and other animal species over the last a couple of million years, and that has evolved to have some qualities that are helpful to humans, and then these kind of medicinal the chemistry and drug development approaches that Ryan was mentioning enable to improve on that chemistry for specific uses. So extending the half-life or shortening the half-life, like going for higher bioavailability or lower, things like that, to then really zero in on specific applications where modern medicine can really help us go the next step. And that's really a bit of the common thread that has led us to start this company and do this together.
Yeah. Many blockbuster drugs were nature inspired at one point. The classic example being aspirin. How exactly was or is rather Kanna used by the SAN tribe, which is if I remember correctly from the beginning, the indigenous group that is most associated with Kanna. Is it something that is used like in a ceremonial context, or is it something closer to like khat or betel nut, which is just kind of chewed all the time, all day, or maybe somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, there's a distribution of reports. One is that it is kind of just chewed. It's kind of the traditional preparation is to actually ferment it. That's one of the traditional preparations.
It's like
So
a Kanna kombucha.
a little bit, yeah. And there's been some interesting studies done on like how that actually affects the alkaloid profile. So there's actually some shifts in strengths and types of alkaloids that you'll find post and before and after fermentation. And typically it's chewed. So as a hunter-gatherer tribe going out and going for long walks, they'll chew on it and help them go for longer without having to eat. And then there's general lifting quality to it that's been described. There's other cases of the preparations being made in things like milk, and then even given to like infants for to keep them from crying. There's all sorts of different applications that have been reported now. And so, yeah, it's fairly interesting.
And you guys are very proud of the fact it's on your website that you have entered into a benefit sharing agreement with the indigenous keepers of the Kanna knowledge. Do you want to speak to that and its significance?
Yeah, I think it's something that we're really really proud of, and thanks for bringing that up because I wanted to make sure that we talk about that before the end of this. I think basically what you are typically used to in pharma is if you develop intellectual property yourself, then you just kind of go through clinical trials and that's fine. I think for the most part, a lot of different teams will tend to license intellectual property from, say, a university or another third party. And that's kind of what we've done here. Only the third party is the traditional communities of the San and the Khoi, which are native to this part of Southern Africa, modern day South Africa and Namibia, so that they can also share in the upside. So the process that we went through with them is to actually meet with their council. So they are organized in a group that is actually represented by certain elders in the community. Our founding CSO, Nigel Garrica, that Ryan was mentioning, has had a long-standing relationship with those groups, which really enabled us to get to an agreement relatively quickly, which essentially gives them the ability to share in the upside. So, if there is a successfully launched product, that there will be a portion of the proceeds that is then fed back to the SAN, so that they can do with it what they please. And that's our way to make sure that we can, practice reciprocity and really build, since we are building on the shoulders of giants, also make sure to contribute with our part of the innovation, to the part of the innovation that came before us. And so that's been agreed, a while back. And I'm happy to say that we've now also had that agreement ratified by the South African ministry, the relevant ministry, so that we also abide by the Nagoya Protocol, which kind of regiments these sorts of projects. So that's really core to who we are as a team.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that more companies don't take these types of agreements seriously. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that the U.S. is one of the few countries in the West that has not signed on to the Nagoya Protocol, unfortunately. So people don't feel like they have to. But hopefully we see more things like this in the future. I feel like we've kind of touched on most of the things about Kanna, the company itself. I kind of just want to ask you guys, what are some of the most interesting things about running a company? What are the challenges? What are the exciting parts? What are some of the things that you've observed over the last 2.5 years that have maybe informed your thoughts around, entrepreneurship, leading companies, et cetera? If you have any wisdom on that front that you want to leave the listeners with.
Gonna go first, John?
And if not, no worries.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think from my end, I really enjoy, learning a lot across functions. I mean, this is a topic that everybody that's involved with is really passionate about. And we kind of came into this topic of, nature inspired medicine, small molecules, from a lot of different backgrounds. But to kind of have it all developed within this topic and project's been really, really interesting. And I think part of the reason it's moved so quickly too. I mean, everybody's been pretty dialed into what they're really good at, and that's really amazing to kind of sit back and watch that happen. Got to remind yourself of that from day to day, because there's a lot of challenges that come up at just about every moment. But I think that's kind of been one of my big takeaways from this. So.
Yeah, on my side, I'd say, this is, I would call it kind of like company number 2 that I'm building from scratch. At Compass Pathways, I was employee number 1, but the company was there already when I joined. And granted, it was a pretty like stellar story of kind of growing pains and like success in the 2017 to 2020 2021 period. But I had kind of really wanted to be in the driver's seat and learn how to make my own mistakes, let's say. And I've definitely felt like the second time around, it's been great from that perspective, of building things from scratch with Ryan and the team, and enabling this kind of scenario of doing it very efficiently with very few people in the end. I mean, the company is still less than 10 people strong, and has been able to achieve all these great things, or what I consider to be like very promising feats. And so I think the first lesson for me is just in this notion of like control and the ability to steer my own ship. Of course, aided by others, and that's been great. The other feeling that I get is, at Compass we had the luck of being able to start at human research at the start, and that was because we were able to basically argue to the FDA that we didn't need to do any animal work, because here was all the animal work that the likes of Johns Hopkins and Imperial College and all these other great institutions had made. So I had a lot of experience with that phase 1, phase 2 kind of stage. But in an interesting way, I hadn't actually built something from scratch in the preclinical stages. So that was a great learning opportunity for me. And I've been able to do that, thanks to the great kind of subject matter specialists that are in the team. And then the last one that I'd say is, I think every organization, no matter the size, is pretty complex to run. At Kanna we have less than 10 people, but we still, there is a fixed cost or a fixed, let's say, overhead of running a company that you need no matter what. Processes like governance, finance, people, etc. And so yeah, so that let's say fixed costs versus variable costs of like running a company, and how to manage the operational expenditure to keep things going until the next value inflection point is definitely something that I feel like I keep learning about, and I'm excited to kind of get to the next stages of in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I'm excited to watch and be able to participate in a small way as an investor. I think what's so exciting about Kanna to me is that it's kind of like a prototypical example of the kind of thing that VCs should be backing. VCs, especially in times like these when things are tough, end up backing these like small, incremental, very safe ideas. But what's cool about Kanna is that it's got so many of the check marks of things that make it a great investment. It has massive upside potential. it's first in class in some ways. And it's also in this area where there's some type of maybe unjust stigma associated with it. That means that others have overlooked the opportunity. And I think that this is the kind of thing that both entrepreneurs should be starting companies in and VCs should be more willing to fund. So hopefully you guys and your success will inspire others to follow the same sort of playbook applied to other areas, of course. So I applaud you guys for what you're doing, and very appreciative of the opportunity to be on board as an investor through Empath. Ryan and John, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people follow you guys online? Do you have a website or anything you want to point people to?
Yeah, sure. So our website is pretty simply www.kanna.health. And then we also have a LinkedIn page that you can follow as well. We do have a newsletter, which you're welcome to sign on to, which you can do on the website in a couple of clicks. Really, really happy to have been on the podcast. Thanks a lot for having us, bro. And great to have you as an investor.
Yes, absolutely. We will do this again once you guys have IPO'd, and it'll be great. So thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Bye.